So when I decided to start doing a channel, I had some ideas of things I wanted to go over, things that I eventually wanted to talk about, but current events come up too, and you don't anticipate them, which is why the first video I'm doing here turns out not to be about various social issues, but actually about something that seems to be a bigger deal among a lot of people on the internet these days, specifically Doctor Who no longer streaming on various services in the United States. It was Doctor Who has been on Netflix and other streaming services for a long time, and as of beginning of this month, February of 2016, it was removed from Netflix. People were talking about going over to Hulu, but it's being removed from there as well. If it hasn't already, in short order, Doctor Who will not be available on any streaming service in the United States, legally anyway. And when I first heard this, my reaction was probably a lot like most other people's: disappointment that that would no longer be available, wondering what exactly the motivation was to take a show that's so popular that people like it and removing it so that people can't actually see it and removing the exposure of the other show. But I then looked at it a bit, tried to research, figure out what they're doing, read up on some of the rumors, and ultimately what I came to conclude was that this is an early step in what's going to be a fairly long process that ultimately will benefit most television viewers in the United States and will primarily hurt the sports leagues. And frankly, I'm okay with both of those things, so I don't really have a problem with this, as disappointing as it is short term. So I don't have a problem with the decision the BBC has made. I'm probably going to have to explain how I got from point A to point B on that one, though. So we'll start with this. Major League Baseball contracts have gotten much, much larger in recent years. Some years ago, a player by the name of Albert Pujols moved from the St. Louis Cardinals, who he had been playing for, to the Anaheim Angels. The new contract that he signed was for approximately $250 million over 10 years. He's averaging about $25 million a year. By the end of the contract, he's going to be 41 years old on opening day his last year, and he's going to get paid $30 million that season, which, even by the rather insane economics of professional sports, is unreasonable. That's basically sunk cost for how much a player is actually worth in terms of what they provide to the team on the field. No player that age is worth $30 million. That contract was signed and agreed to by the team, knowing that that money was not going to be well spent in the long run. It was necessary to sign him for the length of the contract so that in the early years he'd actually be worth something to the team that was approximately what he was getting paid. Basically, you pay for 10 years of a prime player, and you only get 3 or 4 or 5 years of a prime player, and the rest is spent for somebody who's not going to be that good by the end of the deal. And teams have enough money to do this, which leads to the question, where the hell do the teams get that much money that they can burn $30 million a year on a single player? And the answer to that is television broadcast contracts. I did some research on this because when you're doing informative videos, you actually have to do research, so you're providing information that you're not making up, which is a bit of work, but it's worth it. Go over a couple of examples here. Major League Baseball, the national contracts, I'm going to go by an annual basis because different contracts are different lengths, and it's hard to compare the numbers if you don't break it down like that. But for Major League Baseball, the contract they have with ESPN, ESPN is paying them about $700 million a year for broadcast rights. Fox Sports is at $500 million. Turner is paying about $350 million. Right there, you're talking $1.5 billion for broadcast rights on a national level for Major League Baseball and playoffs. That does not include local deals, since baseball has so many games. Each team has its own local contracts for not national, but regional, so fans in the area can actually see the games, and there's more money from that. And there's other contracts. This is just giving you a ballpark idea here, but we're talking $1.5 billion for Major League Baseball just on national contracts. NFL works a little bit differently because the NFL does not have any local contracts, so all of their deals are national. Now, bear in mind, the NFL has a much shorter season. They only play 16 games. So you're talking 256 regular season games, if I did the math correctly. Plus, there's like 11 playoff games. So you've only got about 270 games in a season. For this product, for these broadcasts, DirecTV has a contract where they're paying $1.3 billion a year just for football broadcast rights. ESPN has the Monday Night Football contract, and they're paying $1.9 billion on average. That's more than the 3 national baseball contracts combined, just for ESPN's Monday Night Football, of which there's like 17 a year. I think they get a couple playoff games too. But right there, you're talking $100 million a game for broadcast rights. Fox, CBS, NBC all have their own contracts as well. Those are about $1 billion a year. So football, right there, you're talking over $6 billion for national contracts for 270 games. If you do the math on that, it works out to approximately $20 million a game, ballpark, just for the broadcast rights for these games. It's an obscene amount of money, and it seems completely ridiculous that this is what these games are actually worth. So let's lead to the next question. The leagues are getting this much money from TV networks to broadcast games. Where on earth are the TV networks getting this kind of money from? I mean, advertising revenue can't be that much, can it? The answer is no, it can't. The money for that is coming from you or anyone else who pays for cable or satellite TV. The way that these are structured is that every service, every cable company, every satellite provider that carries a station is paying a certain amount of money for that station for the rights to broadcast it. And most of them are fairly small. I mean, you're talking, 5, 10, 15 cents per subscriber. If you take your cable bill and it was itemized out per channel, you would see how much was going for this. Now, for each one, when you look at satellite TV and cable, you might have 200 or 300 channels, and most people, at least in my experience, there's maybe a half dozen that anyone actually watches regularly, and then the rest are just sort of there, and occasionally you might catch something on them, but for the most part, you don't need them, you don't watch them, you don't care about them. They just sort of clutter up the schedule grid. But you have to pay for all of them. You can't select your own channels. You need to take everything that they offer you in the bundle, the basic package, the expanded package. When you break down the cost per channel, again, most of them are fairly cheap. The biggest expenses are coming from the sports networks. Specifically ESPN. The estimates that I was seeing, I checked, and it's hard to say because they're averages, and you have different contracts for different cable companies and providers and so on. But the most expensive channels, other than ESPN, topped out at about $1.50 per subscriber. ESPN in 2014 was just over $6 per subscriber, which means your cable bill or your satellite bill, $6 of that goes to ESPN every month. Now that works out to $72 a year. Doesn't matter if you watch it or not. $72 a year of your money is going to ESPN. If there are 100 million subscribers to cable and to satellite TV in the country, $72 a year times 100 million subscribers means that ESPN is directly receiving $7.2 billion a year just from cable subscription fees and from satellite cable subscription fees. That is why they can afford to pay $2 billion a year for football games, because they're making so much. That's just a drop in the bucket. And that is also why you will never, ever, ever be able to choose which stations that you want and which ones you don't want for your cable or satellite. You get the packages. You cannot say, I only watch these 10 stations. I don't want anything else. Give me these 10 and nothing else. Never happened. If, say, half the people who have cable want ESPN and half of them don't, those those 50 million people approximately not getting ESPN would cost the network $3.6 billion. They are never going to do that. Business looks out for business. They don't care what you want. They've got revenue streams. That's what's important to them. That's why you're never going to be able to select only the stations you want. Networks would never give up that kind of money. This is why the huge explosion in professional sports salaries happened at about the same time that cable TV became popular and started spreading across the country. Correlation is not necessarily causation, but in this case there is a very strong causation here. Once that revenue stream was created, once ESPN started and wanted to start bringing in the major sports, that's where it came from. That's where the money started, and it's not going to stop. So cable TV and these huge sports contracts are very strongly linked, and they're not going to give that up. Which brings us back to Doctor Who, which is what this video is about. Now, go back and check if you don't believe me. What I first thought, again, when Doctor Who went, was I didn't understand why they were going to be lessening the exposure of the show that's so popular. But the prevailing belief is that the BBC is looking to eventually make their own streaming broadcast service, much like Netflix, where you can watch TV shows on demand. Netflix is something that couldn't have existed 20 years ago, but as the internet has grown and can carry more bandwidth, you can actually stream video without any problems, unlike the days of Real Player, if you remember that. This has become a viable business model. And Netflix, I think, realized once they'd established this that they were still completely at the mercy of other people's content, which is why they're doing original content now. But in the end, Netflix, by proving that this is a workable business model, is going to inspire competition that in the long run is probably going to destroy them. Other companies are going to do the same thing themselves and cut out the middleman, and that would be the end of Netflix if that were to happen. That's what the rumors that BBC is doing, and what other stations and organizations and studios have considered doing. If that is what happens, then in the end that's a good thing, because if you are interested in BBC's programming and their archives and what they choose to put online, you'll be able to pay the money and get it and watch it whenever you want. And if you're someone who's not interested in it, you don't have to. Ultimately, this is how we're going to get the option to select and choose our own channels that we will never get from the cable companies and from the satellite companies. You will be able to choose which ones you want and which ones you don't. And once this happens, a lot of those really stupid stations that fill out that grid of 200 and 300 stations are going to go away. I don't think there's going to be a lot of people who are paying good money for the game show networks, or for 7 Christian networks, or for 15 home shopping networks. There's certain audience for them, and it's not everyone. And once those stations don't have people who are forced to support them simply by having cable, there's not going to be enough money coming in to keep them in place, and they are going to disappear. And frankly, and for the most part, rightly so. So, as disappointing again as it is for Doctor Who and for other shows, that movies that people like to disappear from streaming services where you can watch them whenever you want, ultimately this is going to be a good thing. We will only be in a position to have to pay for what we want to see, and we will not be required to support station after station after station that we have absolutely no interest in. This is not going to happen fast, but it is happening, and I think that in the end, every one of us who watches TV is going to benefit from it. So short-term pain, long-term gain. It's going to take a little while, but I think that we're all going to like the end result a lot better than what we have now.